Welcome to Fear and Greed Sunday Feature. I'm Michael Thompson. It was a huge week this week for energy in Australia, headlined, of course, by the Coalition's announcement of its nuclear policy, which we are going to hear plenty about in the lead up to the election. But there was a lot happening as well in the renewables space. We had a French-backed company signing deals to proceed with the second stage of a mega $4 billion wind farm in Victoria. And a few days prior to that, the federal government gave the green light to a massive offshore wind farm stretching along the New South Wales southern coastline. It is, I think, a very good time to revisit an interview that Sean Aylmer did in October of 2022 with Brett Wickham, who is the local boss of Acciona Energia, the Spanish infrastructure giant's energy division. Now, we spoke to Brett because at the time that company had just started work on what will ultimately be one of the biggest onshore wind farms in the world, and it's happening here in Australia, in Queensland. It is a great behind-the-scenes look at this aspect of renewable energy with one of the biggest players in the world. I hope you enjoy it.
Welcome to the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. We've talked plenty on this podcast about the shift to renewable energy. Today, I wanted to talk to one of the companies driving the change in Australia and building the infrastructure that will see it actually become a reality. Brett Wickham is the local managing director of Acciona Energia, the energy arm of the Spanish infrastructure giant. Brett, welcome to Fear and Greed.
Thanks very much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Such a big topic to cover. Look, let's start sort of perhaps on the specifics. In the last month or so, you've started building the $2 billion MacIntyre Wind Precinct in Queensland. Once complete, it'll be the largest wind farm in the southern hemisphere. Just how do we get our head around the scope and the size of the project? I mean, how long it'll take to build, how much it'll cost, how much electricity it'll generate?
Yeah, look, good question. I mean, the project has been, I guess, on the development pipeline for about 7 or 8 years now. And it started off as a very small project, which didn't really have a grid solution for it. The smaller voltage transmission network that we wanted to connect it to, it wasn't really viable. So we challenged our team internally to, to make it big and see if we could connect to the 330 lines, which are adjacent to the site, 60 kilometres away. So that's how this sort of embryonic stage of the project was. It grew from about 500 megawatts. To connect a line that far, you need to make the project quite large. Then we decided, well, for security purposes, we needed to make that line double circuit, so then you make it larger. Now that's where we sort of sit at the 1,000 megawatts that we're at today. I must admit, though, the 1,000 megawatts is being principally driven by the size of the modern turbine. So the turbines on site are a 5.7 megawatt turbine, and 20 years ago when I started in the industry, we were at a little over a megawatt. So, it sort of shows you that 5-fold increase. 1,000 megawatts, to put in context, will power about 700,000 homes. So, it's a really meaningful, chunky project, which sort of helps us with the transition towards a low emissions future, and certainly with the recently mandated targets for 2030 and again stepping forward to 2050. So $2 billion, 1.96 I think to be correct, across both wind farms. So there's two wind farms on the precinct. There's the 923 megawatt MacIntyre wind farm, which is 162 turbines. And then we hope very soon we'll be able to start construction on the 18 turbine, 102 megawatt Carrara wind farm for CleanCo.
Okay, so you're building the wind farms, you're building the connectivity to the grid.
Yep.
Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. So it is a massive project. In the last few days, we've had quite a few of the big energy guys coming out and sort of saying, there's been a conference on, and they've sort of said, the transition to renewables isn't the question anymore. It's kind of how fast can we do it? The infrastructure, it's just not there. We're not capable of doing it at this point. How big a challenge is it to get something, $1.96 billion wind precinct up, and then beyond that, to actually have a grid that allows for this to all happen?
Yeah, look, it's a great question. I mean, in the case of MacIntyre, we specifically could only connect this size of project in a very, very robust part of the network. So we worked for a long period of time with Powerlink, so the TNSP in Queensland, to select the right location, and connecting near Millmerran, where we'll be connecting into the 330 lines, is the right place to connect 1,000 megawatts, and hopefully in the future we'll be able to connect some more there. But you're right. The challenge for renewables at the moment is getting the right location on the network, whilst in parallel, the federal government's announced the Rewiring the Nation Fund, and there's various interconnector upgrades that are going and different backbones that are being put in for transmission. I guess the challenge is trying to keep building whilst those new transmission interconnectors are coming over the next, it'll be 5, 10, 15 years. But certainly I think the benefit of projects like MacIntyre is that we've got the capacity. I mean, the transmission line we're building for MacIntyre is, as I said, a double circuit 330 kV line.
Brett, I got to jump in. I'd love to know what a double circuit 330 kV line is, but I don't. Just for the people like me, it's kind of how put that into words that I can understand.
Yeah, look, it's like having two extension cords, basically, from where we're connecting to the transmission network up to where the wind farms are. So we talk about double circuits because basically you've got then redundancy. So you're running 2,000 megawatt circuits, which can run independently. Okay, and we do that for redundancy, and if there's outages on one line, we can transfer to the other side. It just gives you better redundancy, it gives you better capacity, it gives Powerlink and the way they operate the network more flexibility. So when we talk about double circuits, we're basically just putting in two highways for the electricity to travel on. That's all.
Okay, so do you expect that? I mean, over time there'll be a bunch of MacIntyre Wind precincts around the country, or it might be a hydro precinct, or it might be a solar precinct, that type of thing. Is that kind of where we're going to get to?
I think it's where we're going to get to with respect to the renewable energy zones that almost all the states are talking about. The benefit of a renewable energy zone is you have projects which will share infrastructure. You also have the benefit to the local communities that you're not building a spider web of transmission lines across to service one project. You'll end up with one wind farm here with a line going, and then you'll have another wind farm with a line going in the opposite direction. That's not the best outcome for the communities and so forth. So I think the idea of having renewable energy zones, it also allows the TNSPs and the people who are an AEMO, who are operating the transmission network, to then be able to establish the rules, the conditions, the technical infrastructure to be able to support connecting that volume of renewables in a single location. So I think the idea of, New South Wales has got RESs, Queensland are pushing RESs, Victoria are pushing RESs. I think it is the way of the future. But also I think the way of the future is these larger scale projects.
Yep.
Because they will allow you to then have projects which are, whilst they're larger, they allow you to have the benefit of being a bit further away from communities in better wind zones and having less community impact. So, building a 50 megawatt project cannot sustain a 70 or 80 kilometre transmission line. You have to go bigger. But going bigger and having a longer transmission line means you can be further away in areas that have better wind, but B, areas which are a bit more remote and rural and perhaps away from more populous areas.
Stay with me, Brett. We'll be back in a minute. My guest this morning is Brett Wickham, Managing Director of Acciona Energia. So we talk a lot about the need for renewables, and everyone sort of accepts that. And then we talk about what happens to the, coal workers. We don't talk a lot about what about the communities that are now potentially living in precincts where they're having potentially noisy wind farms nearby. You must have to bring communities with you. Has it been an issue so far?
You're right. I mean, you have to engage with communities from the first step in having the conceptual idea of having a wind farm. So whether that's like us doing an initial social impact assessment of what's important to the communities in those areas, what's not important. And certainly in the Acciona Energia's position, I think we pride ourselves in perhaps not what projects we do build, but what we won't build, because there's certainly some areas where you shouldn't put, wind farms and solar plants and so forth, because you need the required setbacks. You need to take as you said, the community on board with you. So in the case of MacIntyre, social impact assessment right up front to find out what the community wants, what they consider that they need out of projects like these. We've set up a community engagement committee with independent local businesses, community members. It's got an independent chair who has regular monthly meetings on engaging with the community about the project. We also then have a shop front in the town of Warwick, which has been open for the last 2 years, which is essentially, you can put out all the, newsletters, newspaper articles, updates, but you really, in some communities, need to be on the ground to engage with people. You sometimes have older community members who aren't that savvy with emails and so forth, but you need to have almost what we have, a drop-in centre where they can come in and ask questions and engage and so on and so forth. We have a dedicated community relations team who manage all that for us. In the case of MacIntyre, it's been nothing but unequivocal support for the project, okay? Yep. Which we see as a huge positive, but we don't treat it with any level of, we must be doing everything right. We continue to have to engage. We continue to talk to people, whether they be landowners or local businesses or the local shires, whatever it might be, to make sure that all the way through we're, trying to under-promise and over-deliver. Our model is to develop, build and operate for 30 years. So I guess the community does have the benefit when they're dealing with Acciona that, they're dealing with the same company all the way through.
Okay. So wind is one part of the renewables puzzle, solar, hydro, etc. But it seems to be a very big part of the puzzle, really, or a big piece of the puzzle. What makes Australia so suited to wind energy?
Oh, look, I'm not sure it's any more or less suited than any other country in the world. I mean, the difference with Australia with countries like South Korea, Japan is obviously our land mass. Yep. With respect to the wind speeds we see in Australia, it's no more or less beneficial than any other country we operate in. So Acciona Energia operates in about 20 countries globally with all sort of proven renewable technologies. And I wouldn't say that the wind resource or the solar resource is any better or any worse than any of the other countries we operate. We do have the land mass here. I mean, Spain talks about building 100 or 200 megawatt projects as a maximum. Well, we're going to a gigawatt. Future projects will be even a lot bigger than that. So obviously we just have an abundance of land. And with respect to Acciona operating here, we have a good rule of law. We've got a stable government, and there's lots of reasons. We've been here for 20 years now, Acciona, and this will be MacIntyre's our 6th wind farm. So, we see this as a very good place to operate.
Just finally, you mentioned government there. The new government has introduced an energy policy, just parking the value judgment on whether it's a good or a bad policy or whether it's coalition or Labor. Is it helpful, though, to have a policy at least?
Oh, no doubt it's helpful to have a policy. I mean, we've all got to have, we've been through, at a federal government, we've been through so many negs and, RETs and, energy policies, and I think we've changed those energy policies more than we've changed prime ministers in the last 10 to 15 years. But having one consistent policy and now, having it placed in law, the 43% emissions reduction target by 2030, it gets us going. I mean, we all have an appetite to invest. We're ready to invest. We're ready to build. We are running out of time rapidly, so, we need to accelerate. But at least having that firm policy then allows companies to make decisions about, bringing capital into Australia, about, continuing to develop projects, about being able to recruit people, and it helps us with solving those challenges. The state governments in the last, since I've been in the industry for 20 years, have probably been doing a lot of the heavy lifting, but without that sort of global federal policy at the top level, it was very difficult. It was a bit piecemeal and so forth. But now that we've got that locked in, everyone's working very, very hard. I think I calculated the other day, it's 2,650 days odd until 2030.
Wow.
That's not long when you're considering building renewables projects and what we have to do.
Brett, thank you for talking to Fear and Greed.
Thank you.
That was Brett Wickham, Managing Director of Acciona Energia. This is the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. Remember, this information is general in nature and you should always seek professional advice before making any investment decisions. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.